Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, I am so happy today because if you can see watching the video version, I am smiling from ear to ear because I get to talk to somebody about a topic that we don't ever cover on the podcast. So I'm hoping it will be wonderful. It might be a bit scary in some places for me. I'm just going to say that out loud. But we're going to talk about pleasure. And I'm not just talking about going to the spa or having a pedicure or eating your most favorite lunch, which, all things bring pleasure. I'm talking about sexual pleasure. So let's go there today. My special guest today, her name is Laura Zam, and she is the author of the best-selling book, The Pleasure Plan. She's also a sexuality educator, a relationship coach, and a women's health advocate. Her work focuses on women's sexual pleasure and healing. And she's been featured in quite a few places that I'm sure you've seen her on. The New York Times, Salon, Huffington Post. She's spoken at TEDx, off-Broadway. She's done shows and hundreds of venues around the world, helping women find pleasure in sexual solutions. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Laura Zam. Hey, Laura.
Hi, Mary. So great to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to speak to you today. And I'm a little bit giddy, if I'm honest, to talk about this topic. We're not talking about...
I'm always giddy.
Yes, we're not talking about cash flow. We're not talking about your retirement savings. We're not even talking about, your self-care, but maybe we are in some ways. So let's start somewhere to lay some framework down first. Like, how would you define the word pleasure?
Pleasure, to me, is the body moving towards something. And pleasure is really instinctual. We are, as creatures, we're given this apparatus, we're given this motivation to move towards that which is we're deeming good for us, and to move away from that which we are deeming not good for us, threatening in some way, scary, etc., repulsive. So pleasure to me is that movement towards, but it's that's just the first part of it. There's also, once we can get it, let's say it's some strawberries, right? So there's the motivation to move towards, which is pleasurable. And that's where most of the dopamine is in that anticipation. Then there's the enjoying the strawberries. That's a related pleasure. And then there is the satisfaction.
Yeah.
I call this the arc of pleasure. 3 component parts.
Yeah. And I also imagine the nostalgia of pleasure, the memory of once experiencing a good time. It takes on its life of its own. So why do you think pleasure is such a key aspect to living a whole life? Why is pleasure important?
I think that pleasure is how we are moving away from any kind of harm. It's like an antidote to harm. It's an antidote to anything that's not pleasurable. It's the way that we rebalance and compensate. And as we go through life, especially now, our lives are so difficult. Everybody's life is more difficult now during the pandemic. I don't usually have universal sweeping statements like that, but I can probably attest, or I feel confident attesting to that. Our lives are more complicated now and more difficult in some ways. And so it's just, so pleasure is that way to balance out the hardship. And then there's a lot of things that accumulate, some kinds of harm. We've all experienced trauma. I feel that pleasure is also really, is really healing. Is really healing with that same concept of, balancing out the past. And I think we need ways we need ways to put a smile on our faces.
Yeah, and to invite pleasure into our lives. And I think maybe that's why I feel a little bit nervous, giddy in talking to you, is that, as a woman who was raised in the States, I'm 43 at the time of this recording. We were not raised in households or in a society that really welcomed or encouraged us to talk about our sexuality or to talk about pleasure in this way with others. It's something we sort of keep quiet and we just, keep inside, and maybe we read a few books about it, but gosh darn, I don't want anyone to actually see the cover of the book or know that I'm talking about it, right? It's such a thing that we shove down, it seems, in many societies, in many cultures. What's behind that, do you think?
Well, first of all, we don't have the education. We don't have a pleasure education. And so we don't know that we're even entitled to pleasure. When we are taught about sexuality, most of us are taught that it's for reproduction, or we're taught the mechanics of reproduction that leaves out, in fact, the parts of the female body that get the most pleasure. They're not even mentioned.
No, there's birds, there's bees, and then somehow there's babies, right?
That's right. There's birds or bees, but there might also be, excuse me for using plain language, there might be a vagina, but there's no mention of the clitoris.
Yeah.
And so we're not taught that this is something that we should, that it is important.
Yeah, yeah.
And then society upholds that. I think that it's difficult to get good information from people. It's also just very private, and people have a lot of shame around this.
Yeah.
I mean, we call that area of the body our privates for a reason. And when they are not working optimally, we blame ourselves, especially women. We blame ourselves if we are not experiencing pleasure, as opposed to maybe more aptly identifying the fact that we did not get a good pleasure education and we didn't get good information maybe from mentors, females, that older females, to teach us about this sort of thing.
I think you're right. And Laura, what I think is really interesting when I look back on 2020, yes, it was a crazy year and a lot has shifted and changed, globally for a lot of us. But you know what? I look back, this is the very first year, truly, where I started to notice a shift culturally in advertising, ever so subtly, where I'm starting to see more women who look like women, like me, that have curves in their body and a little bit of extra in their tummy. And to see that reflected back in print ads or the big billboards in your grocery store that you don't even notice are there. It's a subtle shift where when you start to see yourself reflected back in what's pushed out in the world, I don't know, there's something reassuring and wonderful about that, for me at least. Are you seeing that where you live as well?
Oh, yeah. And I think the media really probably in the last 5 years, I think that it's really changed. A lot of it is television. Certain television programs have really taken it upon themselves to have as protagonists women who look like women that we know, not like every woman has to look like a model or every woman looks like a model.
Right.
So I think we've started seeing ourselves more on television, and I think then Me Too really accentuated the need for this. I think that there are lots of issues around Me Too that are not only, importantly, of course, but not only about not being violated. There are issues around what else are we entitled to, and we are entitled to see ourselves represented as we really are, and we are entitled to love ourselves in this way, even if we do not look like a model, and most of us do not look like a model.
Yeah.
We're entitled to have great sex, even if we don't have bodies that look like women in magazines.
Yes, with size zero waist. And not to say that those aren't women, they certainly are, but it's so nice to finally see that diversity, not only in shape, but in age as well.
Yeah.
When I see those group photos of women of all shapes and sizes and ages and colors and all of the things, it does provide just a little bit of hope that, when I turn 50, I won't just become invisible to the rest of the world. Gosh, imagine that, like it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's a slow, giant ship slowly making a shift and changing. So I do have hope here.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
yeah. And so if we're wanting to invite in and create more pleasure in our lives, then where do we begin? Like, how do we begin to ask for what we truly desire, especially if you've been a people pleaser for way too long in your life?
Yeah. Well, I've got a system, and it's super, super simple, going with the theme of the podcast, for pleasure. It revolves around something I call a pleasure hour, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's 1 hour, 60 minutes of good feelings once a week. Pleasure hour is, the way I recommend it, is once a week. I think that if we could carve out some time once a week to only experience pleasure, then we can rewire ourselves to crave it, rewire ourselves to ask for it, but we can also experiment with pleasure within that hour. And let me just say that not everybody can carve out 60 minutes once a week. And so that's my recommendation. If you can carve out 10 minutes once a week, that's fine. 5 minutes once a week.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of the first exercise in your book, which, by the way, I love reading your book. Every chapter at the end has some tips for you to craft and create your own pleasure plan. If you don't mind, I'd love to read from the first chapter. Page 30, it says, as a practical tip that you could try today, journal for 5 to 10 minutes and set a timer. During that time, construct a perfect romantic vision for yourself. It could be meeting the partner of your dreams, making love in a way that really feeds your soul, or anything that turns you on. Don't be afraid of being too racy, sweet, tender, animalistic, or any combination. And when that timer goes off, add this sentence to what you wrote. I deserve this. And you know what? That last piece, because I think we sort of have visions or fantasies or things. We go, oh, yeah, that's nice for somebody else, or in a book or in a movie, or, the neighbor down the street. But when you actually put an affirmation like that, I deserve this, it changes everything. You're defining your desire and then backing it up with saying, yes, this is something I am worthy of. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, it is, to make that shift is very active, because I don't think it's conceptual. I mean, it is ultimately, right? We're making a cognitive shift.
Yeah.
But it needs to, I believe, it needs to come from some sort of regular action, some sort of practice.
Yeah.
It's like anything else, it's strengthening a muscle. And if you let the muscle go lax, and most of us have, we've let those muscles go lax, there's no shame in that, right? There's no judgment, because it's just what we do. It's just what happens. It's what society, right, in many ways encourages us to do, right? To just be on the treadmill, or
go,
right,
yeah.
go. So if we can just step back and say, okay, well, I'm gonna get into this practice as frequently as you can, but just carve out some time and experience pleasure. Now, it doesn't have to be full on sensual pleasure. It can be something simple. It can just be mindfully eating strawberries. Just mindfully eating strawberries. To connect this, Joe, though, to something sensual, I'll take it beyond most mindfulness exercises, which are great and I think a fantastic foundation for this kind of work. But I would say we could take it a step further, that when you're eating the strawberry and you're enjoying it, you feel that, yes, that first part of pleasure I talked about, feel your body moving towards the strawberry, saying, yeah, I want this. And then you just think about your genitals. You don't have to do anything. You just notice them. It's just getting them involved in some way. It's connecting them neurologically. You're riding this wave, there's already pleasure, so you don't have to make a whole big to-do about this. Oh, I don't have any libido. No, I never think about my genitals. I don't want to do anything with them. All you have to do is, you're already there going, yum, 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 is just say, oh, there's this part of me below the waist.
Yeah. And I'm imagining right now, Laura, that thousands of people around the world are thinking about their genitals all at the same time. And we have made that happen, Laura. Well done. But
Yay.
I hear that, and I totally see it, because you're creating a neural pathway, right? You're connecting genitals to pleasure, and that be okay, right?
That's right. And that pleasure with the strawberry, because it is instinctual, right? Because nature has given us this apparatus to motivate us to move towards something that we love, be it a strawberry or chocolate or whatever it is that you respond to. Yeah. It's because we don't have to think about it, and we don't have to resurrect something. We can just ride that and make that neurological connection. It's so much easier than saying, oh, I'm going to schedule time to masturbate, or I'm finally going to have that conversation with my husband about how bad sex has been for the last 14 years.
Right.
Right? That makes it so huge. And yes, these are this is going to be part of the evolution, of course, of creating a healthy sex life eventually, but it's not the place to start. We need an easy place, a simple place to start.
Yeah, and with those simple wins, I think you build confidence in understanding what you desire first, like identifying that. Because I think for a lot of us, we do move into our masculine and we just go, be productive, tackle our to-do list, fire away. I mean, it's funny, even today, I have an affirmation deck, which I absolutely love, from Kiki K. It's a London designer. And I pull a card from it every day. And like today's card, no joke, says, I am brave, I am bold, I'm fierce. And when I read those, being a type A go-getter entrepreneur, I step into my masculine. I think, okay, I'm a brave, bold, fierce fighter, tackler of my to-do list. And I don't take that approach of really adding a feminine touch to it, or I just think of it as such a masculine thing. And I think that there is something to pleasure in understanding that one over the other isn't correct or better, right? Like you can have pleasure in your masculine, you can have pleasure in your feminine. What are your thoughts there?
I think that it's like you said, I really think it's a balance. And I think that there's a misconception that when we step into that masculine role and we have some kinds of resistance, or we have maybe the more feminine parts of us, the softer parts, are going, oh, but I really just want to like curl up with a book today. Yeah. Right? Or we might say, oh, I was so wounded yesterday by, I reached out to so-and-so and she said she couldn't do that for me. She couldn't help me. And I'm scared. I'm scared to do all these emails today. Right. I think that when we're in that masculine space, we're told that we're not supposed to really feel these other feelings. We're not supposed to have the hurt. We're just supposed to like ride over it, or don't even pay attention to it, or
strive and achieve.
Strive and achieve, and you can acknowledge that you were hurt yesterday, but you don't want to dwell because you just don't want to get bogged down. Right. And I think that really winds up. We wind up sabotaging ourselves when we don't really give into what that let's call it more feminine, more feeling part of us needs.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a really good balance we can achieve, but only with compassion, really acknowledging all those feminine parts that might not be on board with, okay, let's go, 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 go today. If we can understand why we don't want to go, go, go today. If we can understand that with compassion, and then we can say, okay, well, maybe we need a nap at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, and I think that there is something to this, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper. I think that when you can define and vocalize your desires that bring you pleasure, and side note, caveat, pleasure and desire does not just come from external things or external people. It's something you can give yourself, right? That's what I've learned from your book as well. That when you can define and vocalize and then actually go through with giving it to yourself, then there's something greater to that, and it builds over time so that you do feel more in flow with your life rather than trying to plow through your to-do list and going, oh, I have zero time for this. Like when you do define it and then act on it and then receive gratefully, like it changes your outlook on a lot of things, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in this chakra system, which I really love, I'm also, I didn't mention, but I'm also a yoga teacher. And it's something that I roll into all of this work. And in the chakra system, the second chakra is emotion, but it's also sexuality and creativity.
Yeah.
It's that flow, it's the fluidity of our lives. And power is the chakra above, that solar plexus area. And the thinking is that if you have power without that foundation of fluidity and pleasure, you get a rigidity in the power, or you get an exploitation. You get these perverse, harmful forms of power, as opposed to a power that is really informed by emotion, by empathy, by compassion, and also a power that doesn't burn us out.
Yeah, that's the first time someone's explained chakras, that something clicked in my head when you just said that. And it made me visually think about when you stack rocks one on top of each other, that if your rock at the base is shaky, all the other rocks are going to tumble. And that's sort of what I hear in that when you say that the power of the sacrum chakra is above the root. I just think that that's really interesting. So then moving on, I understand also that for a lot of us, myself included, I'll raise my hand, when we think of desire, when we think of pleasure, it's a loaded word, because there are a lot of traumas or not so pleasurable memories and anchors that are rooted deep, deep, deep inside us, that for a lot of us, we go, that's not for me, or, oh, I don't want to talk about that, or can we just move on to something else, or just flick through Netflix and pretend like it doesn't exist. Where do people begin there when it comes to sexual trauma and healing first, that to even get to the place where they can define their desires?
Yeah, well, I have a system, this 5-step system. I call them steps. It's not necessarily linear.
Yeah.
But I like to just put it together in something that people can encapsulate, because sexual healing can be such a amorphous and overwhelming topic. And so I'll tell you if it's okay. I'll just run through it. There's 5 component parts. And I want to just preface this by saying that if somebody has experienced sexual trauma, and that is so many of us, and people of all genders, that it can be a really good idea to see a trained psychotherapist. I mean, a psychotherapist who's specifically trained in trauma, and also sexual trauma would be helpful. But so what I'm proposing here is something that would work as an adjunct, not in lieu of psychotherapy. I just want to say that clearly.
Yeah.
But I do also feel that when people are in psychotherapy, sometimes this part of their healing gets neglected because it doesn't come up in therapy, because we're not talking about the moment to moment or the kind of the nitty gritty of what's going on sexually. And the therapist may or may not have information about, what we can do in those situations.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the 5 different steps of this sexual healing, it's an acronym, and the acronym is CLAIM, or CLAIM.
Yeah.
And I'll just briefly run through them. C stands for confess. And this means to talk about things that are shameful, to root out the shameful aspect of this. I mentioned originally that when people have any kind of sexual issue, they blame themselves. And so it's very important that we understand if that's going on for us. And most of the time it is, no matter what we've experienced in our past. We are blaming ourselves.
Yeah.
So and there's shame, and most of the time there's shame around that. So just figure out if there is shame, and then the antidote to shame is to talk about it. Talk about it with a therapist, talk about it with a friend, talk about it with some other practitioner, talk about it with a podcaster.
No one's listening. Yes. Yeah.
Put it out there somewhere so that you're not carrying it in this way that can become pathological. Yeah. It can really eat away at us. That's our C, confess. L is to lean into brokenness. This is a little counterintuitive because we're told that if we feel broken, and almost every survivor that I talk to carries a piece of this. They feel broken in some way. I'm saying lean into it. Don't run away from it. Don't be afraid of it. Lean into it, but with some reframing. And the reframing is that brokenness is not a label.
Yeah.
It's not a category of your category that says you're defective.
Right.
It's a diagnostic tool. If we understand that and are unafraid, or at least are summoning some courage. Of course, we're always going to be afraid, but can just summon enough courage to say, something is maybe off. That's why I feel broken. Let me see, what is that specifically? Am I numbed out when it comes to my body? Am I afraid of the opposite sex or the same sex? Am I do I feel like I have some sort of physical revulsion, or my body pulls back? Right. What is it specifically that's going on? Because once we can drill down and find out where that weak link is, something may be a little broken. It's okay if we can find out what that piece is, not us defectively, but that piece, then we can find the remedy.
Yeah, and follow the thread beyond that. Yeah. Okay. So what's the next one?
So A is to acquire an antidote. So following suit, if we find out, okay, what is it that may be broken with us, we can say, okay, then how can I balance that? This goes back to pleasure as balancing out. Let me give you an example from my life. So one way that my abuse, my childhood sexual abuse, lives on in my life is that I have a tendency to want to just kind of crawl up in a numb space. Like forget I have a body and just sort of like crawl into a ball and, not exercise, maybe eat too much. That's a very tempting place for me to go. And it's also a place where I don't feel powerful. I almost don't feel like I have any agency in my body. So the antidote for me is exercise. Just making sure that I exercise on a regular basis.
Yeah.
It's a kind of like a simple scale, right? Finding the other element to put on the other part of the scale.
Right.
So that's our A.
Yeah.
And then our I is to invite pleasure. And I'll mention again the pleasure hour. Invite pleasure 5 minutes once a week, 10 minutes once a week. If you can manage an hour, whatever you can carve out, if you can carve out designated time, schedule it. Really, seriously, 5 minutes next week. just see where could this possibly fit in. If you could carve out that space, then you can invite pleasure on a regular basis, and it becomes a habit. It becomes a practice.
Well, and I can tell you firsthand, Laura, I did that earlier today. I was reading your book. I laid out a blanket in my backyard. The sun was shining. It was a glorious day out. A dog curled up next to me and fell asleep. And that was absolute pleasure for me. Just being able to dive in and sink my teeth into your book and lay in the backyard in a little bubble of no distractions, no one needing anything from me. So pleasure can come in all shapes and sizes. And totally can be free as well.
Oh, yeah. So carving out that pleasure, especially if we're just reconnecting with our sexuality or connecting for the first time, especially if we're talking about sexual trauma and people had early experiences like I did, we may not have any foundation of a healthy sexuality. So I want to say that because lots of times advice on like sort of reclaiming your mojo and stuff assumes that you once had one. So I want to give voice to those who never had one. And then the M is manage the damage. And it's kind of a harsh way that I say it, and I do that purposely because it's a misconception, a misunderstanding to think that any kind of healing, trauma healing, is going to be permanent if we just have some kind of epiphany, that we're not going to have this old wiring. Like I said, with me, right, for the rest of my life, I'm going to want to curl up into a little ball and eat a lot of chocolate and forget I have a body.
Disassociate,
Disassociate a little bit, which is not quite the same as like the comfort place, like feeling my body in a pleasure place under the blankie. This is a little bit more like just feeling off. It's almost like a form of depression. And so that's always going to pull me, right? So I need, when I manage the damage, it means I acknowledge that the wiring exists, and I'm going to lay down new neural pathways, and I'm going to feed those pathways, right? Give those pathways some sort of consistent practice, as I say, so that I can continuously, or on some regular basis, as much as possible, give those pathways some reinvigoration, right? Strengthening them, reminding the neurons, this A, you're going to go here with this B.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, from a visual point, it's like planting a new seedling of a tree next to a stream. So those vines and those roots grow strong because they're being fed regularly by sustaining good water, sustaining good habits, right? That helps start to grow something beautiful and healthy, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, if we can just look at things a little bit differently to see, I guess the way I could sum this up is that sexuality and pleasure, sexual health and pleasure are a practice.
Yeah. And what I think is really beautiful about your book in particular is, right from the first couple of pages, you really open up and talk about the bumps and trumps and trials and tribulations that you've had in your own sexual life. I remember, and looking back on page 40, it is here, you were desperately trying to figure out, why was sex so painful, like physically painful. And I've certainly gone through seasons of that myself as well. And again, if you don't mind me reading, you wrote here, page 40, it's as if for 3 decades I had dislocated shoulder, but not a single soul knew what to call it, so they couldn't fix it. Then one day, a person who actually knew about joint injuries examined my arm and said, "No worries, Missy, your shoulder is dislocated. I'll just pop the ball back into its socket." If it had been my shoulder, would I have decided that challenges with one part of the body made me a defective human being? Probably not. Yet that's what I've been doing my whole life. And I think that so many of us women who have issues with our physicality, whether it's body image issues or physical issues with our God-given parts and things for sex, we think, well, this piece is broken, so all of me is broken.
Right.
Throw me out and get a new model, replace it and find something different. There's so much that is woven into our anchors of who we believe we are and our identity that hold us back.
Yeah. And they do hold us back because what I found going on this journey that I eventually wrote about is that once I started to carve out pleasure for myself and started to ask for what I liked. Well, first I had to figure out what I didn't know. What do I even like?
Yeah.
I was so used to just going along with what my husband and before him, other partners liked. I thought that that's what sex was. Sex was, oh, okay, I'm just supposed to go along with this and I'm supposed to really like it. And if I don't really like it, then yeah, something's wrong with me.
Yeah, or pretend that you like it and all the while be sitting there in pain or waiting for it to be done. Ugh.
That's right.
Yuck.
Exactly. And, and then I realized, oh, this could be something that I'm co-creating. I can step in here and saying, hey, even the activities that we're going to do, they're going to be activities that I like.
Yeah.
So let's see, let's have a conversation about, all right, what could we possibly do now as we, kind of move into an amorous moment together. I can say, okay, what would I like out of this?
Yeah, yeah. And
it's revolutionary. It was very revolutionary for me, and with the women that I work with. I do coaching and classes, etc. It's revolutionary for them as well. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that's what I loved about the book in particular. So, you joke here, and sometimes you have to add a little bit of humor to what sometimes is really tragic and sad in life. But the first diagnosis is that you received was called, and tell me if I'm saying it right, but vaginismus, which does actually sound like Merry Christmas to you. But
it's vagina Christmas.
Right? There was no Christmas celebrations happening in your vagina, it sounds like, but this is the thing, is that once you can start to vocalize it, then you can start to find practitioners, whether it is your gynecologist or a psychologist or a sex therapist or a tantric sex therapist, or even just a best friend to talk to. One of the things that I loved in this book, and I am putting this on my to-do list, is something called a sex brunch. And before everybody goes, wait, what did Mary just say? Define that, Laura. What is the sex brunch?
A sex brunch is when you gather together some friends or maybe friends of friends, and you talk about sex. And it's a way to normalize discussion. And you can do it in a structured way. I recommend it. If you go to my website, laurazam.com, I have actually a downloadable file or document that gives you instructions how to do a sex brunch. But it's, you gather a group of people together, and I like to do it this way, where everybody, when they come in, they write an anonymous question.
Yeah.
And then people pick questions, not their own, but they pick a question from a hat, let's say, and then people ask this question out loud. So then that way nobody has to identify themselves as the person who had that question. Of course, people can speak more freely in addition to that, and sometimes they do, but people can also stay safe and anonymous. But it really is a space to say, hey, this is a time when you can ask a question that you've always had, but you were too embarrassed to ask.
And it's normalizing it. Like, that's the thing, is that I think a lot of us think, well, this is me, I'm broken, I'm defective. It's only something that happens to me because I'm not a size 0 girl, and I don't have the parts and the look and the thing, blah, 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 whatever our story is. And I just love that idea. And I imagine that to start, maybe doing it with girlfriends that you know and trust. But I also am kind of delighted by the idea of doing it with men and women in the room. room, I think it could be a real fruitful conversation. Side note, we're not talking about having an orgy. we're talking
No.
about we're talking about having maybe some nice food, a bit of wine, and having open conversations with conscious other adults, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I incorporate this into talks sometimes.
Yeah.
So I do all kinds of different talks, and sometimes I do something like this where I have people write questions, and I may do a regular presentation and then maybe reserve this for the end of it. But I did a couple right before the pandemic. I did two in Florida that were mixed gender. And it was really interesting. I've done mixed gender before, but this I thought was the most fruitful in terms of the guys were really anxious to talk about their issues.
Yeah.
And I heard them in a new way. And what I heard particularly was the performance anxiety that men experience can be very, very intense. And we sometimes don't really acknowledge it, especially coming from a feminist perspective. I'm really interested in women's sexual pleasure and equity in the bedroom, and women have been neglected. And so I could see that people who are on my bandwagon particularly could overlook what's going on with guys, that they are not necessarily free and saying, well, it's got to go my way because I'm the patriarchy. Lots of times they're saying it's got to go my way, in terms of how things proceed, is because this is the only way that I feel competent.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so much deeper level things going on there, and
Right.
the mask of a masculinity that,
That's right.
they're getting the same feed of this is what a man looks like. This is
That's
what
right.
he looks like and experiences in bed. And this is what a successful sexual intercourse looks like or not. And
That's
so
right.
there's so many layers to that.
I think I believe everyone needs sexual healing for this reason, because we're all carrying something. That's a woundedness. We're carrying these anxieties. We're carrying these fears when we're with our partner, if we're enough. Whether it's what we look like, how we're performing or not performing. We're carrying all kinds of trauma, not just from, let's say, abuse, but also from rejection. Right?
Yeah.
There's so much that we're carrying.
Well, and that's one thing why I would encourage anyone that's listening that if anything that Laura has said here resonates with you, I highly recommend picking up a copy of her book, The Pleasure Plan, One Woman's Search for Sexual Healing. It's in bookstores wherever you are in the world, both online or your local bookshop. And, the beauty of that is it reads like a memoir over your journey through creating your pleasure plan, and then also, executing it and learning along the way. But I appreciated every chapter having those journal points to help reflect and practical ways to put it into action for you. Because, you're right. I think that all of us, regardless of gender, are probably carrying some anchors from our past or from our childhood even, of what we believe is our sexuality, or what we believe good sex, quote unquote, or bad sex is, and how we fit into that, then maybe it's time to shed some of those anchors and move into all that you actually are capable of being. So yes, I will put a link in the show notes. You can find it at thesimplifierspodcast.com for more information about Laura, how to get connected to her, and to learn more about the book. Now, also, you have got a podcast that's launching in January 2021 called Sexual Healing Central. Tell me more about this.
Well, I'm so excited about this because what I want to do is bring together different kinds of experts and people who have experienced their own sexual healing, but people across the spectrum. So not just women, not just survivors. I want to talk to men who are successfully navigating maybe prostate surgery, where they've lost their erections and they are now redefining what it means, how to make love. and how to feel confident in themselves. I'm going to talk to doctors who specialize in sexual medicine. I'm going to talk to a friend of mine she writes asexual romance novels. She identifies as asexual or ace.
Yeah.
And she writes romance novels about how asexual people can find what they're looking for. Then there's all kinds of things going on with those of us in menopause and middle age. There's all kinds of healing from from young people who are just learning about sex for the first time and maybe navigating to a more authentic experience, not what they see in porn. So there's just therapists who specialize in it. I've got long lists of people who
Laura, literally, my little hamster, my hamster wheel in my brain is just going whirling because there's so many avenues that you can explore with this. So I'm so excited to listen to your podcast when it comes out.
Awesome.
And it's called Sexual Healing Central. We'll put a link in the show notes for everybody to check that out as well. So, Laura, I have a couple of questions as we wrap up that I like to ask everybody. And thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but I think this is the first step for all of us to create more pleasure into our lives. So, Laura, what is one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Well, I have a book here that I want to talk about briefly. It's called Feminine Genius, and it's by a fabulous woman named Liana Silver. And Liana talks about, so the subtitle of her book is Waking Up and Turning On. And her book, I think, talks about intuition and ways to really tap into this deep, deep wisdom and knowing that we have and power that we have as women. And a lot of it actually centers around our genitalia, which she sees as this source for great wisdom and power. So her book I go back to again and again and again. I just find it brilliant.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes for that book as well. It sounds intriguing. So tell me, who is one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things? And we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, one day maybe we'll have them on the podcast.
Okay, well, I do have a friend. Her name is Elizabeth McCain. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth is a fascinating woman. She's an interfaith minister. She's a psychotherapist. And she is also a storyteller and an author. And she just wrote a book that's based on a one-woman show that she had called A Lesbian Belle Tells All.
Love it.
And it's funny and it's poignant and it's just so well done. And she just has so much to offer, such deep, deep wisdom in terms of healing, and then also in terms of how we can use storytelling to help us grow and to heal old wounds.
Now she sounds very exciting, because I think a lot of times we've been taught maybe from an early age that your spirituality is over here and your sexuality is over here, and those two don't play together. But actually, I think they are interconnected in more ways than one. That's beautiful. Yeah. We will link her up in the show notes as well if people want to check her out. So, Laura, I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
Well, I do a gratitude practice at the end of the day. I'm just gonna tell you what's always on my list is my husband, Kurt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. During the pandemic, it's very hard to be cooped up with someone 24/7 for months and months and months. And I have to say, this has been a test to our relationship, but I feel like we really passed that test. And in a way that I find shocking, that I just feel like we get closer and closer. And so much of that has to do with the fact that he is, he's such a great partner and willing to just really continuously grow. So I'm thankful for my husband.
That's beautiful. And Kurt plays a big role in the Pleasure Plan, the book. So he
Yes.
is, it's great to kind of hear that as well. So where online can people connect with you the most? Your website is laurazam.com, but is there a social media channel that you hang out in most?
Yeah, I tend to hang out a lot on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Okay,
All
great.
all three of those. I try to hit them up every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, any of those places, and I'm really open to DMs if people want to contact me. That's a fantastic way to get in
Fantastic.
touch with me. And I try, especially on Instagram, to provide links for everything, the newest stuff that's going on.
That's wonderful. So we'll put the links to all of your social media accounts into our show notes, again, at thesimplifierspodcast.com. So my last question for you today is this, Laura. And again, thank you so much for your time today and for the book. It really, truly is a treasure. And I've been really enjoying diving into it. So someone somewhere in the world is listening to this episode right now, and she is feeling so far away from pleasure, so far away from being able to vocalize what her desires are, and feeling just broken. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
I would say, what do you want right now? What would be pleasurable? And just follow that. It might be an espresso, right? It could be, I want to stretch my back out,
Yeah.
right? I want to just catch my breath.
Yeah.
So I think when we just ask that, right? But I'm definitely not like, what do you want in life? But what do I really want right now? You get some really interesting answers. And that is it. That's the whole foundation for reconnecting with big P pleasure, with big S sexuality. It's just that what would be nice right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And then follow through. Laura, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. This has been so great. Thanks, Mary.